although Alejandro had given his word for her. These doubts tormented Nicholas, and wouldn't let him rest as he went through check-in, boarded the plane, and settled into his seat. There was no turning back now. He had to fly. This promising business opportunity had arisen suddenly and offered great prospects for his company. Rejecting it would have been madness, especially since it could disappoint his partners, those who trusted him. Nicholas hadn't even had time to get to know her properly. He could have left the girls in Esperanza's care, but it wouldn't have been fair to burden her with that responsibility since taking care of the little ones all day was exhausting. She needed her rest at night, so it was crucial to have a second person to help. However, there was no time to find a nanny. The contract had to be signed urgently. Who else could he turn to but his friend Alejandro, a trusted doctor? I urgently need a nighttime nanny for my girls, Nicholas told Alejandro. Alejandro thought for a moment before replying. I have someone in mind. She just needs work. And if you hire her, you'll be doing me a favor too. What's the problem? Nicholas asked, intrigued. She's a gypsy, Alejandro replied. Nicholas swallowed hard. I see. But can you vouch for her? Nicholas insisted. Yes. I trust her 100%. Alejandro answered. That response was decisive. Nicholas nodded. Have her come right away. Soon after, a young woman of medium height, with braided brown hair, and wearing a long dress appeared at Nicholas's house. She rang the doorbell and waited patiently to be invited in. At that moment, Nicholas was already almost ready to leave, giving last-minute instructions to Esperanza. Don't worry. Everything will be fine, he assured her as the young woman entered the house. Nicholas observed her closely. Her large, serious eyes looked at him with attention. After a quick introduction, he said his goodbyes and left the house, leaving the two women to get acquainted without him. He knew Esperanza would do the right thing. She would show the gypsy around the house, at least the necessary parts, and supervise that she fulfilled her duties. However, doubts about the correctness of his decision still gnawed at him. But there was no turning back. Esperanza was Elena's older sister. Nicholas and Elena had met at university at a party. He was immediately drawn to the charming blonde, who was chatting happily with a group of friends, their laughter resonating throughout the room. That was how their relationship began. Elena was in her second year, while Nicholas was about to graduate and join the family business. His father, a shrewd and wise man, had begun introducing him to the details of the business from a young age. And Nicholas, with his sharp mind, learned quickly, helping his father gladly. 2 years after finishing university, Nicholas was already well established in the business, handling most of the operations. Meanwhile, his relationship with Elena progressed quietly, without any ups and downs or tragedies. Both were aware that their relationship would lead to marriage. And so it did. Their wedding was lavish and luxurious, attended by wealthy and powerful families from both sides. Among the guests were many influential personalities from the city. Nicholas's and Elena's parents gave them a new house with a beautiful garden. It was a large house with enough rooms to accommodate a large family and host visitors. For several years, they lived happily, enjoying each other's company in a calm and harmonious life. Nicholas dedicated himself to his company, while Elena finished her studies and spent time with her friends. From time to time, she would mention with sadness her sister Esperanza, who hadn't been able to find love and still lived at their parents' house. Everything stayed the same until Elena became pregnant. That was wonderful news. Nicholas treated her like a treasure, not letting her do anything around the house and fulfilling all her wishes, which, to be honest, were not many. Elena wasn't the type of woman who craved unusual things during her pregnancy. When the time came, the couple welcomed two beautiful twin girls, both blonde like their mother. Nicholas hired a nanny to help with the girls so that his wife wouldn't get too tired taking care of them all the time. But when the twins were 3 months old, Esperanza, who frequently visited the house to help with the little ones, began staying longer. Nicholas noticed how much she loved the girls, always wanting to be with them. Seeing the dedication of her sister, Elena suggested to Nicholas, "What do you think if we give her a room in the house? That way, she can stay close to the girls all the time. And maybe we won't even need the nanny." Nicholas had no objections. Esperanza wouldn't be a bother. She was reserved and quiet. And besides, Elena understood that her sister needed the chance to leave her family home and live a different life. Esperanza didn't interrupt their lives. She spent her time caring for the girls, playing with them, and giving them her full attention. As Elena had predicted, the nanny was no longer necessary. Esperanza took on that role completely. Everyone got used to this new life. At night, when Nicholas returned home, Esperanza would leave them time alone and retreat to her room, where she would read or take care of her own matters. Elena couldn't stop thinking about how to help her sister form a family, constantly urging Nicholas to introduce her to some of his single friends. But these meetings never went beyond formal dinners. The men left without anything concrete, and Esperanza retreated to the girls' room, where she either played with them or watched over them while they slept if it was late. That was how life went on until the twins turned 3 years old. After the girls' birth, Elena developed an interest in driving, something she had never shown before. When she asked Nicholas to buy her a car, he was surprised but agreed to her request. "You're not home that often. And sometimes I just want to go out," Elena explained. There was nothing wrong with that. Now, she could go to the mall by herself, or take the girls to the park or countryside. Sometimes, Esperanza would accompany her. But occasionally Elena would go alone, saying that she liked driving fast on the road, feeling the freedom as if she were a bird. Nicholas was uneasy about his wife's passion for speed, always asking her to be careful and use her head. But his warnings fell on deaf ears. One afternoon, Elena's car lost control and veered off the road. When Nicholas received the news, he couldn't believe it. It was just another workday. Everything was going according to plan. And suddenly this tragedy struck. It was hard for him to accept the loss of his wife. For days, he refused to believe it was real, still expecting to wake up and realize it had all been a horrible nightmare. One day, while he was immersed in his thoughts, he remembered that he had 2 daughters who needed him. During that time, the girls had been under Esperanza's care, who had practically taken on the role of both mother and father for them. Nicholas was deeply grateful to her. But at the same time, he felt embarrassed. She too was grieving the loss of her beloved sister, but hadn't forgotten about her nieces. Esperanza continued taking care of the girls, replacing the absence of their mother as best as she could. Nicholas and the twins depended greatly on her. And life went on, with the pain slowly fading. Nicholas became even more absorbed in his work, growing harder and more determined. Strangely, his rigidity led to more projects and greater profits. However, at home with his daughters, he transformed, letting go of his unyielding business persona and showing a more tender side as a loving, attentive father. Esperanza continued caring for the girls with dedication. She no longer thought about finding her own path or forming a family. If one day she met someone, she wouldn't stop it. But in the meantime, she was thankful to be there. But then another misfortune arrived. Just as the girls were about to turn 5, and Nicholas was planning a big birthday party for them, They unexpectedly became ill. It started with a slight weakness. The girls became apathetic, tired quickly, and didn't want to do anything. The strange thing was that they both showed symptoms at the same time. At first, Nicholas didn't pay much attention. But soon he began to worry and took them to the hospital. The doctor examined them thoroughly and ordered several tests. But none of them revealed anything conclusive. A long process of examinations followed, during which Nicholas took his daughters from one doctor to another without getting a clear answer. One doctor suggested hospitalizing them, hinting at the possibility of a future surgery. However, Nicholas refused. They need to stay home. They'll heal better here. I don't want them breathing hospital air, he insisted. That's when he remembered his old friend Alejandro. Their families had maintained a close relationship for years. And the friendship between the two men went back to their youth. Alejandro, a surgeon, had gained much prestige and was recognized as one of the best doctors in his clinic. After another round of tests that still didn't provide a clear diagnosis, Alejandro tried to reassure him. Look, the results can be interpreted in many ways. These odd things happen sometimes. That's why we shouldn't rush to conclusions. They may need surgery. But not now. We just need to observe them for a while. Meanwhile, I will prescribe a supportive treatment. But make sure it doesn't interrupt the treatment. Nicholas nodded, feeling relieved to have someone as trustworthy as Alejandro by his side. Fortunately, I have Hope. Hope cares for the girls with such dedication that I have nothing to worry about. Alejandro responded, nodding in satisfaction. Hope took care of giving the girls their medicine at the prescribed time every day and kept Nicholas informed about how things were going. However, there was no improvement for a while. The girls seemed to be in a chronic state of illness. And although the adults hoped for an improvement, the situation worsened drastically. The girls' legs stopped responding, they could no longer stand on their own, let alone walk. Desperate, Nicholas couldn't understand what was happening. He visited another clinic, where another doctor re-examined the test results, shaking his head with concern, but offering few concrete answers. The prognosis remained uncertain, and the proposed treatment seemed endless. Not knowing what else to do, Nicholas decided to consult Alejandro again. What should I do? Nicholas asked desperately. Keep giving them the medication I prescribed, was Alejandro's firm reply. He was convinced that it would eventually take effect. But Nicholas remained worried. But it's getting worse, Nicholas insisted. Even so, Alejandro responded, maintaining his stance. The medication will work. Trust me. And so they continued with the treatment. By then, the girls could no longer get out of bed, even sitting down was painful for them. Hope stayed by their side day and night, sitting in a chair between the two beds, talking to them, reading books, singing to them, or simply encouraging them with words of support. Nicholas was grateful for Hope's devotion, but he couldn't shake the anxiety he felt. One afternoon, returning earlier than usual, Nicholas passed by the girls' room and heard Hope talking to them. She was finishing telling them something and then everything would be fine, she said, in a soft and warm tone. Nicholas stopped suddenly. Is she implying that I don't spend enough time with my daughters, he thought, feeling invaded by guilt. It was true that he spent little time with them, his work consumed him. And there always seemed to be something urgent requiring his attention. But now, in addition to his own sense of responsibility, an important new matter was forcing him to travel to another city. He was nervous about the dilemma of whether he should cancel his trip to be with his daughters. But his commitment to his partners forced him to go. I need a trustworthy nanny to look after the girls while I'm away, he had told Alejandro over the phone. Alejandro recommended a woman The same gypsy woman he had met years ago, when she was just a little girl. Without much hesitation, Nicholas agreed. And so, Shani, the gypsy woman, arrived at his house. From the very beginning, she proved to be different from anyone else in her community. She had grown up rejecting the traditional norms of her people, seeking to forge her own path in the world. Her story began when, as a child, she had ended up in the house of a good and kind family. In her childhood, Shani had been begging on the streets with her mother. But that day, drawn to the beauty of the upper-class neighborhood they were in, the little girl wandered off and got lost in the elegant streets of the city. When a sudden storm hit, a kind woman rescued her and took her to her large house. There, she met Alejandro, the son of that family, who stayed with her until the storm passed. This experience left a deep impression on both of them. Years later, Shani ran into Alejandro again. Now a young woman. Her parents were trying to force her to marry a man from her community, someone she feared. Desperate, Shani fled her home one night and sought the house where she had been welcomed years earlier. With nowhere else to go, Alejandro immediately recognized her, remembering the impact the little girl had left on him, and welcomed her back into his home. Over time, Shani started working for the family, handling household chores. She proved to be so hardworking and reliable that Alejandro began recommending her as a caregiver to other families. Gaining an excellent reputation over the years, Shani became a respected caregiver, known for her dedication and professionalism. Now, 6 years after starting her independent life, Alejandro recommended her to Nicholas. Although Nicholas initially felt uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a gypsy woman, his friend's recommendation was enough to convince him. Nicholas discreetly installed a camera in his daughter's room to make sure everything was going well in his absence. The image of Shani sitting quietly next to the girls' beds soon became a constant in his life. Every night, Nicholas would connect to the camera from his hotel room, watching as the caregiver looked after his daughters. Nothing in her behavior seemed suspicious, but the mere sight of her gave him a strange sense of calm. One night, while watching the live feed, Shani turned and looked directly at the camera, as if she could see him through the screen. Nicholas was startled, wondering if she knew she was being watched. But there was no way she could have known. Slowly, the woman moved out of the camera's field of view and sat down in a chair between the two beds, where she remained still for a long time. Nicholas kept watching from his hotel room, unable to take his eyes off the screen. The image of Shani sitting in that chair, vigilantly watching over the girls with a calmness that was almost hypnotic, was comforting to him. He felt guilty for installing the camera without telling Hope, but the fact that Shani was taking care of his daughters reassured him. Yet, he couldn't shake the slight discomfort he felt. That night, after watching for a while longer, he closed the laptop and fell into a deep sleep. The images of Shani's dark eyes looking at him affectionately lingering in his mind. The following days were chaotic for Nicholas, filled with meetings and negotiations, leaving him with barely any time to think about anything other than work. However, each night, he made sure to connect to the camera to check on his daughters. During these brief sessions, Shani always appeared in the girls' room, reading them stories or simply sitting in silence, keeping watch. The girls seemed to be getting better, but Nicholas couldn't tell if it was just an illusion created by his desire for them to recover. Meanwhile, at his house, Shani was taking care of the girls in an exemplary manner. Despite how large the house was and how solitary it could feel, Shani always kept herself busy, whether helping in the kitchen, offering help to the gardener, or just making sure everything was in order. However, there was something that deeply bothered her, the medication Alejandro had prescribed for the girls seemed to be ineffective. To her surprise, she discovered that the medicine bottle in the kitchen was nearly full, as if it had never been used. Shani approached Hope, who was still in charge of administering the medication, and asked about it. "Don't worry," Hope responded firmly. "I take care of it. I don't want Nicholas to be distracted with these things. It's my responsibility. And I know exactly when and how to give them the medicine." Though Hope's words sounded convincing, Shani couldn't shake the feeling of distrust. How could the bottle be almost full if the girls were supposed to be taking the medication twice a day? Determined to get to the bottom of things, that very night, when everyone in the house was asleep, Shani went back to the kitchen, her hands trembling. She opened the cupboard where the medicines were stored and took the bottle she had seen earlier. After inspecting it closely, she noticed that it didn't seem to have been used. With her heart racing, Shani took the bottle and sat in a corner of the kitchen, trying to make sense of everything. The girls weren't improving, and something inside her told her that Hope wasn't being completely honest. Then she remembered something else, the mysterious powder Hope used to add to the girls' food. Could it have something to do with the illness of the little ones? In the following days, Shani watched Hope more closely. She realized that Hope always prepared the girls' food herself and never allowed anyone else to participate in the process. One morning, Shani offered to help her, but Hope flatly refused. "The girls are my responsibility," she said sternly. "I take care of everything related to them." That response only fueled Shani's suspicions. So, she decided to act on her own. One day, when Hope was busy with other tasks around the house, Shani went into the kitchen and found the bottle with the mysterious powder that Hope added to the girls' food. Without hesitation, she took a small sample of the powder and put it in an envelope she carried in her bag. She also took some of the pills from the prescribed medication to compare later. That same night, after making sure the girls were okay, Shani decided to speak with Alejandro. Although she knew what she was doing was risky, she felt she couldn't stand idly by. Alejandro arrived the next day and examined the girls. The girls seemed to be improving, although slowly, Alejandro said after a thorough examination. But something doesn't fit. If they were really taking the medication as prescribed, their recovery should be much faster. When Shani showed him the nearly full medicine bottle and spoke about the powder she had found, Alejandro's concern deepened. Alejandro frowned with concern. "This isn't right," he murmured. "I need to investigate further." That very afternoon, Alejandro returned with the results of the analysis of the mysterious powder. What he discovered left him stunned. "This powder is a very strong sedative," Asani explained. "It has no curative properties. In fact, it seems to be contributing to the girls' muscle weakness." Shani froze upon hearing those words. The truth had finally come to light. For reasons they still didn't understand, Esperanza had been administering a dangerous substance to the girls instead of the correct medication. Alejandro and Shani couldn't believe what they had uncovered. As they talked, they began to realize the seriousness of the situation. Shani, with her sharp instincts, had felt something was wrong, but never imagined that Esperanza could be giving the girls something so dangerous. "We have to act quickly," Alejandro said seriously. "We can't let this continue. But we need to be careful. We don't want to alarm Nicholas, especially while he's away." Shani nodded, understanding the importance of staying calm. Alejandro decided that, for the moment, they should continue administering the correct medication to the girls discreetly, without Esperanza noticing. This way, they could ensure the girls began to improve without causing an immediate conflict. Over the following days, Shani stuck to her routine at the house. closely monitoring Esperanza and ensuring the girls took the right medication. Whenever Esperanza tried to give them the powder, Shani intervened in some way, distracting her. Slowly, the girls started to regain their color and energy. Nicholas, still away from the city, noticed the changes in his daughters every time he checked the camera. The girls seemed more lively, more like their normal selves, full of the energy he remembered before they had fallen ill. However, he couldn't understand how this sudden improvement had occurred. He decided that as soon as he returned, he would speak with Esperanza and Shani to understand what had been going on. The day of his return, Nicholas arrived home with a mixture of anxiety and relief. He was eager to see his daughters in person, but also worried about what he might discover about their recovery. Shani greeted him at the door with a calm smile. But there was something in her eyes that made him suspect there was more to the story. "How are the girls?" Nicholas asked immediately. "Much better," Shani replied, trying to remain calm. "You should see them. They are much more lively." Without wasting any time, Nicholas went straight to the girls' room. When he opened the door, he couldn't contain his tears of joy at the sight of his daughters standing and playing together on the floor. It was the first time in months he had seen them like this, and the relief was overwhelming. "Papa," the girls shouted, running toward him to hug him. Nicholas knelt down and took them in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. All of his fear and anxiety dissolved in that moment. But something inside him still felt strange. How had this sudden improvement occurred? And, more importantly, what had been happening while he was away? Shani, who had been watching the scene from the doorway, decided it was time to tell him the truth. Taking a deep breath, she approached Nicholas. When the girls left the room, she explained everything she had discovered. "Nicholas, there's something you need to know," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't want to alarm you while you were away, but I think I think she has been giving the girls something that was weakening them." Nicholas looked at her, confused and shocked in equal measure. What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone full of disbelief. Shani explained everything: how she had found the almost full bottle of medication, how she had seen Esperanza adding the powder to the girls' food, and how, after speaking with Alejandro, they discovered the powder was actually a sedative. She told him about the analysis and how, once they started administering the correct medication, the girls had begun to improve. When Nicholas heard this, he was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Esperanza, the woman he trusted most, his late wife's sister, had been doing something so terrible. But at the same time, it made sense. Things hadn't been right for months, and now everything was falling into place. "Where is Esperanza now?" Nicholas asked, his voice heavy. "Alejandro took her to the clinic," Shani replied. "She has a problem, Nicholas. She's sick. It seems that the stress and the loss of your wife affected her more than we realized." Nicholas felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, and guilt. He knew he should have realized sooner, but he had been so caught up in his own grief that he hadn't noticed the signs. He knew he had to face the truth, however painful it was. That afternoon, Nicholas went to visit Esperanza at the clinic. Alejandro had already explained the situation to him, and the doctors told him she was receiving treatment for her mental illness. When he saw her, Esperanza was calm, almost peaceful. But there was something in her gaze that told him she was no longer the same person he had known. She apologized through tears, saying she had only wanted to take care of the girls as if they were her own, and that in her mind, she had believed she was doing the right thing. Nicholas didn't know what to say. He remained silent, nodding slowly, unable to truly be angry with her. He knew that what she had done was wrong. But he also knew that she hadn't done it out of malice. After a few moments of silence in the clinic, Nicholas took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. He knew that what he was experiencing wasn't easy to process. Seeing Esperanza, his late wife's sister, in that weakened state, asking for forgiveness, stirred conflicting emotions within him. Esperanza, he said, his voice low. I don't know what to say. I understand that what you did wasn't out of malice. But still, the damage it caused the girls, they were at risk. And that's something I can't forgive easily. No matter how much I understand your state of mind. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, nodding slightly, as if already knowing she had lost everything. She could no longer care for the girls. And she understood that her life would change drastically after this episode. I'm so sorry, Nicholas, she sobbed. I only wanted to care for them, to protect them. I thought I was doing the right thing, that Alina was asking me to do it from beyond. I didn't realize I was hurting them. Nicholas closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. There were so many emotions at play: confusion, sadness, the pain of his loss, and a deep emotional exhaustion that drained him. I know you didn't do it with bad intentions, he replied finally. But now you need to focus on getting better. You need help. And I need my daughters to be safe. Esperanza broke down in tears, unable to contain the guilt and regret that were eating away at her. Nicholas stood up, placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of farewell, and then left the room. He knew he couldn't do more for her. At least not at that moment. In the following days, life at Nicholas' house began to return to normal. At least on the surface. The girls continued to recover quickly under Shani's care. There was no longer any sign of the weakness that had once plagued them. And their youthful energy began to fill the house with laughter and joy once again. But although things seemed to be improving, deep in his heart, Nicholas still struggled with the devastation of what had happened. He couldn't help but feel guilty for having trusted Esperanza so completely without noticing that something was wrong. He knew he should have been more attentive, more aware of what was going on in his own home. But he also understood that his own grief over Lena's loss had blinded him to the signs. As for Shani, she had become an essential figure in the family's life. Her dedication and care for the girls had not gone unnoticed. And Nicholas felt a growing sense of gratitude toward her. But beyond gratitude, something else had begun to stir in his heart. Something that surprised him every time he saw her. One afternoon, while the girls played in the garden under the warm sun, Nicholas approached Shani, who was sitting on the porch, watching the little ones run and laugh. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost idyllic. Shani, Nicholas said, his voice soft but firm. I want to thank you for everything you've done for me and for my daughters. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened. She looked at him with a warm but shy smile. She knew she had done what she felt was right. But Nicholas' words still moved her. You don't have to thank me, Nicholas, she said. I just did what I thought was right. And I care a lot about the girls. And you, she added, her voice almost inaudible, as if she didn't want him to hear it. But at the same time, wishing he would. Nicholas stayed silent for a moment, studying her face, the sweetness in her gaze, the calm she radiated. And it was in that moment that he realized his feelings for her went beyond mere gratitude. I just wanted to help, she murmured, lowering her gaze nervously. I know, Nicholas replied. But I think you've done much more than that. His voice was soft, and his words hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Shani met his gaze and smiled softly. It was a smile that said more than words ever could. In that moment, the bond between them deepened in ways neither of them could yet understand. Nicholas had thought that he would never find happiness again after Alina's death. But it began to bloom in his life once more. Although the shadow of what had happened with Esperanza still loomed over him, each passing day seemed to bring more hope and light to his home. Finally, months after that terrible episode, Nicholas and Shani decided that they could no longer ignore what they felt for each other. In a simple ceremony, surrounded by their closest loved ones, they celebrated their love and commitment. The girls, excited and happy, were delighted to officially have Shani as part of their family. As for Esperanza, she continued her treatment at the clinic. Although she never returned to live with Nicholas and his daughters, they made sure she received all the support needed to lead a peaceful and healthy life. Nicholas never held a grudge against her. He knew her behavior had been the result of a sick mind. And in the end, her greatest wish had always been to protect the girls. Months passed, and life in Nicholas's house began to stabilize again. Shani had fully integrated into the family, not just as the girls' caregiver, but as a partner for Nicholas. The love that had grown between them was serene, filled with understanding and respect. The girls, for their part, had completely recovered and filled the home with laughter and games. Always running around, radiating happiness, Shani and Nicholas had learned to enjoy the small, everyday moments like family breakfasts, afternoons in the garden, and peaceful nights when they stayed up late talking while the girls slept. One day, while walking near their house, the girls ran ahead of them, chasing butterflies under the blue sky. Shani looked at the little ones with a smile on her lips. But Nicholas was watching her. After everything they had been through, seeing his family united and happy was a gift he didn't take for granted. Shani suddenly said, "I've been thinking about how lucky I am to have found you. You've been much more than a caregiver for my daughters, you've been our salvation." She looked at him, surprised and a bit blushing. Even though they were already married and shared their lives, every time Nicholas spoke to her with such tenderness, her heart beat faster. Nicholas replied, "You and the girls have been my family since I came here. I don't think I've done anything extraordinary. I just love you," he whispered. "And we love you," Shani said, taking his hand and gently squeezing it while they walked. The wind caressed their faces, and the sound of the girls' laughter echoed in the air. It was a perfect moment. The kind of happiness that Nicholas had thought he would never experience again after losing Alina. But there he was, with his new family, with a woman who had brought him joy and with daughters who filled him with pride. One day, Nicholas decided it was time to talk to his daughters about their mother, Alina. Although the girls had been very young when their mother passed away, he felt it was important that they learn more about her. Shani agreed, supporting Nicholas's decision to be open and honest with them. One afternoon, while the girls played outside, Nicholas called them over and sat them on the terrace while Shani prepared lemonade. "I want to tell you something about your mom," he said softly, as the girls looked at him with curiosity. Although they knew their mother had passed away when they were very little, they had never spoken in detail about her. Nicholas took out a box of old photos and began showing them. "This was your mom, Alina. She was an incredible person, beautiful and strong. I loved her very much. And I know that if she were here, she would be so proud of you," he said as the girls attentively examined the photos. Shani stood at the door, watching the scene with a mix of emotion and respect. She knew how important it was for Nicholas to talk about Alina, and how difficult it must have been for him to relive those memories. But she also knew it was a necessary step for everyone to move forward. Not forgetting the past, but not staying trapped in it either. "Did Mom also love us a lot?" asked one of the girls. With an innocent look. Of course. Nicholas answered. She loved you more than anything in this world. And although she's no longer with us, she will always be in our hearts. The girls still felt a little confused by the concept of death. But they felt their father's love as he spoke. But now we also have Shani, one of the little ones said with a smile. And she takes care of us a lot. Nicholas nodded and smiled, looking at Shani as she approached with the lemonade. Yes. Now we also have Shani. And we are very grateful for that. Over time, the relationship between Nicholas and Shani continued to grow in love and complicity. Together, they faced the challenges life presented, but always with the certainty that they had each other. The girls grew up in an environment full of affection, protected by the love of their father and that of Shani, who had become the mother they needed. As for Esperanza, she continued her treatment at the clinic. And although the family's visits became less frequent, Nicholas always made sure she lacked nothing. He knew that his sister-in-law was also a victim of circumstances and illness, and he never stopped wishing her the best in her recovery. One day, while the family was gathered at the dining table, enjoying a simple but delicious dinner, Nicholas looked at Shani and his daughters and realized how fortunate he was. Life had not always been easy, but somehow he had found a new beginning, a new opportunity to be happy. And so, with the passing of time, Nicholas and Shani built a life full of love and memories. The shadows of the past still lingered, but instead of stopping them, they made them stronger and more grateful for the present and for everything they had overcome together. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Write your opinion about it in the comments. Subscribe to the Quentame channel. And share this video with your friends and family. It motivates us to continue working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next incredible story that's about to appear on your screen. We are very grateful to have you with us. In the description below this video, you can open a catalog of all the stories. See you soon.